This summer, we've been in this series, right? The 10 Commandments of Finances. And that, of course, has been a play on words, right? There's only the 10 Commandments from Exodus 20, God's 10 instructions to the nation of Israel. 10 Commandments of Finances. Really, there's lots of different instructions in Scripture. And really, this series has been about talking more about the heart, and our heart attitude towards money, towards finances that God has given to us. We have dug into multiple conversations, and today we're going to look at the concept of debt. And so the instruction today, or the admonition today, would be you should avoid debt. Now, debt, as we begin to talk about this, is something that we're all pretty familiar with as Americans, right? We as a country, if we want to talk about leadership and our leaders modeling for us financial habits and practices, our leaders, Republican, Democrat, Independent, any political leader, what they model for us is to pass budgets of that have more expenditures than the income that will come in. Now, I understand there's debates and all this, and some of you may not like the fact that I said Democrat and you're Democrat, or Republican and you're Republican, or Independent and you're Independent, but let's get past that and just accept the reality, right, that our government lives under the principle of debt. So much so that, I don't know, like maybe 7-8 years ago, on the Bank of America building in Manhattan, you'll see, can you go to that next slide? You see that there's this debt clock. Do we have that? The debt clock. Can you go to the debt clock for me, Julia? There we go. So this is a running debt clock that's actually live right now. How much debt we as a country are in. 35 trillion, 171 billion, 886 million, 900, and then we want another $1 million in debt just sitting here and talking. It's over $120,000 per citizen that our country is in debt. Okay, so this is how our government leads our nation. Every now and then you'll hear political leaders talk about it and how we got to get out of debt and we need to cut the debt and we need to reduce debt every now and then, but the debt just continues to go up. All right? So just an observation, right? Just an observation. This is the way that our government leads. Now, along with that, there's a whole business out there called consumer debt, right? And so I just collected over the past couple of weeks a few mailings that came to our mailbox. 24-25 student loan information to the Belmont family. Got 2 college students, dropped one off yesterday. Build your credit history with the Discover It State Student Cashback Card to one of my sons who's a college student. This comes from Citizens Bank. Open immediately so you can go into debt, right? Here's another one from Capital One. Congratulations! You are invited to apply to go into debt. Another one, you're pre-selected, and I get a $750 bonus cash back for your business if you want to go into debt with us. And then 700,000 miles for your what's it? American United Airlines if you sign up for this credit card. And then I love this statement on this one. Feeling good about money begins with going in debt. No, it doesn't say going in debt. It says with building your credit history. All right, so there's this whole business that is constantly, you get all these flyers, right? You get these mailings to your house, and you are regularly invited to sign up for this credit card or sign up for that credit card, and you can then get credit, and you can live like the American government who's leading us, and we can go into debt. So this is just a reality of who we are as as a society. So here's some information from Money Magazine from May of this year. They write, the average personal debt per individual grew from $21,800 in 2023 to $22,713 in 2024. And that excludes mortgages. And this is according to recent research from financial services company Northwestern Mutual. So look to your left, look to your right. According to the statistics, we're in debt $21,000 to $22,000. Okay, just statements of fact. I'm not making any statements yet about this. We'll get there. Next observation that Money Magazine makes: on average, borrowers said that they spend 29% of their monthly income on paying off debt. 29% of our monthly income goes to paying off debt. And here's how it breaks down by generation. So you see Gen Z, 16,478 average debt. Millennials are in debt 24,830. My generation, Gen X, 28,670. Baby boomers, you guys are doing way better at $18,272 in debt. So this is how it goes. This is all of us, all generations in debt. Now, what are the top sources of debt? The article goes on to talk about how credit cards, 28% of our debt is in credit cards. Car loans is 13%. Personal education loans is 8%. Medical debt is 7%. Educational expenses for children, for family members of your children, 5%. Caring for your loved ones, 3%. And 34% say that they have no debt. So there are some people in our country who have no debt. I'm just going to read from my notes here. Debt seems to be a fact of life, right? And so I write this. Debt is a way to get something now when I don't have the money to get it now. That's what credit does, right? It gives us the ability to get something right now when I don't have the money to get it right now. I can go get those golf clubs. I can go on that cruise. I can acquire hunting gear. I can decorate with a new furniture. I can get that upgraded vehicle that I want to get. This is what debt allows us to do. And then I write this: debt, we think, just like globally as a society, debt we think is a tool to get ahead. But the truth far too often is debt puts us behind. Debt is not always the answer, but in reality sometimes becomes a big problem. Right? If we're not careful, debt can become like a prescription drug medication, right? Prescription drugs can be they are helpful after you had like major surgery, right? That helps to get past the immense amount of pain. And it is helpful for that. But prescription drugs taken over a long period of time is not healthy for us. It actually becomes destructive to us. And debt is very, very similar. It can be very helpful to get us through a short-term period, but over a long term can be quite devastating. All right, so let me just make a few comments about where you might be right now after I put all this out, and then we're going to jump into Proverbs chapter 22 and look at what God has to say about money and debt in particular. So first of all, if you are feeling like you're looking at your life and you're like, okay, I've got debt, and you're feeling beat up, that's not the intent. It's not the intent at all. Scripture doesn't attempt to beat you up for debt, and we'll see that in just a moment. But maybe if you are younger and you've never gotten into debt, that would be something to kind of consider. That maybe not signing up for some of these credit cards might just be a wise financial decision because of what debt can potentially do to us. And that will come more in a few minutes as we'll unpack what debt is and how it affects us. For some of you, you may be in debt right now, and you may be feeling the weight of that. And just by bringing this up is discouraging. And here you are at a worship service, and now you feel discouraged. You went from maybe being encouraged to now you're feeling discouraged and weighted down. Hopefully, as we work our way through the text, you'll find some hope, because the text offers that. And with that, let's now open up to our passage for this morning, Proverbs chapter 22. Proverbs chapter 22. And as you're turning there, I want to remind you that our vision, I said earlier, right, I reminded us of our vision to be internally strong. And when we talk about being internally strong, and we say things like, we're looking for something on the inside to give us strength and meaning. And when we begin to define being internally strong, we define it in this way. We say that, first of all, to be internally strong, you need to know Jesus and his word. Know Jesus and his word. And it's amazing what God has to say about so many different topics in life, that when we listen to what he has to say, consider it, allow the Spirit of God to convict us of it, and then apply it to our life, how it makes us stronger on the inside. And so we're going to look at Proverbs 22. This is God's instruction through most likely Solomon, maybe another wise man, but God spoke through this man, and we have recorded for us these words. And so, beginning in verse 1 of Proverbs chapter 22, and Proverbs, again, are just kind of like these are inspirational thoughts or nuggets of wisdom, intended to not speak like in categories like hard and fast. They're more like, hey, these are good. These are significant observations that, if most generally speaking, if you follow them, these things occur and happen. So the writer writes this: a good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. And then he says, rich and poor have this in common: the Lord is maker of all. A good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. You know, as I read that and thought about that statement this past week, I wrote down this statement. It says, who you are is more important than what you have. This next slide has that on there, has that phrase on there. Who you are is more important than what you have. And so when you look at a good name, this is who you are, right? Your name, your reputation, your character is more important than what you have. A good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed, who you are, your character, who you are as an individual is better than silver or gold. So your character, who you are as a person, is way more important than what you have. And this is a pretty significant point as we think about debt. Because one of the reasons why we go into debt, as I said earlier, is because we can get something that we currently don't have. And sometimes the motivation to get the thing that I don't have the money for is rooted in what it will make me look like to those around me. Right? And so somehow in making this purchase, I am attempting to build my worth and my value and give an image to all of you about what that means about me. And that can be a really bad reason to make a purchase. And often we make that purchase really not like in the front of our mind, cognizant, aware that that's why I'm making the purchase. But if we dig and if we're careful and somebody asks prodding questions, that might pull out of us that the reason that I went after that new wardrobe or that new bit of furniture or that cool new toy was because XYZ person is coming into my life. I haven't seen them in a while and I want to look a particular way. I want to give off a particular image. I didn't have the money for it. I went in debt to get it. The wisdom here from the writer is to say that a good name, who you are as a person, is far more valuable than what you have. Now, the second verse of this is also interesting. Verse 2. The rich and the poor have this in common, right? The Lord is the maker of them all. God makes both the rich and the poor. And that is a significant statement, again, speaking to value. What is the value statement? The value statement of God is this: you are valuable because I made you. Rich or poor, doesn't matter. It doesn't make you more valuable. That's a powerful thought. If you have nothing, and this, as I was thinking about this, I thought about our Ghana team that just returned, and our Ghanaian friends, right, who are living in a slum community in Accra, Ghana. And what it would mean, what they may struggle with when we rich Americans come alongside of them and they look at what we have and may think, I want what you have because if I can have what you have, it will give me value, right? And wrong thinking, right? Because the rich and the poor, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You are valuable simply because you've been made in God's image. God ascribes great worth and value to you as a person because he made you. So it's just an interesting little nugget here, right? That the author says, who you are is way more important than what you have. Second, let's keep reading. Verse 3, a prudent man sees danger. Okay, so this is interesting advice. A prudent man sees danger and takes refuge. But the simple, the guy who's not prudent, the woman who's not prudent, keeps on going, right? And they don't see the danger and they walk right off the stage, right? And they hurt themselves, right? The prudent man sees danger, takes refuge. The simple, they keep going and suffer for it. That says something to us about credit. There may be a warning about going into debt. And the prudent man hears that wisdom, sees where he's going, stops and redirects. Humility, verse 4, and the fear of the Lord bring wealth, honor, and life. That's an interesting statement. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, Proverbs tells us. Fearing God, reverencing God, having a humble heart, bring wealth, honor, and life. This is one of those statements where we have to be really careful. This doesn't mean that anybody who fears God and is humble before God suddenly becomes wealthy, has great honor, and lives a long life. That's the health and wealth gospel that is falsely taught. That's not the truth. And that is not what this writer is saying. Instead, the instruction is that generally speaking, that when I'm a person who seeks after God and I follow his wisdom leads me in the direction that leads to the best way to live, including the way that I manage my finances. The way that I manage my finances will produce wealth if I manage them the way that God instructs. In the paths of the wicked lie thorns and snares, but he who guards his soul stays away from them. So this is an interesting little statement. It just says, hey, watch out for people who are going the wrong direction and don't follow them because they fall into traps. Watch out for the debtors, the creditors who say, here, have more, spend more. Don't ever worry about paying it back. Go so far in debt, it doesn't matter. Get what you want. No. Be aware of that. And then lastly, train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. So this speaks to parenting and how invaluable you as a parent and grandparents play in the role in the life of a young person. You can teach. You can disciple. You can help a young child be internally strong in the way he or she understands money and manages it according to the way that God instructs. And it's our responsibility as adults to live in front of our children in such a way as to teach them this is how you do this in a good and healthy way. And when they get older, now they know and they'll follow that. So as I, kind of was thinking about all of what this might mean, I just wrote down this phrase, which will appear on the next slide. Apply wisdom to avoid disaster and to find good fortune. So that might be a summary statement for this. If you apply the wisdom here in these verses, it will help you to avoid disaster and to find good fortune in life. Third, and this gets us to directly at debt. Verse 7, the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. Let me read that again. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. The rich rule over the poor. The borrower is a servant to the lender. The person who goes in debt, who takes out credit from the credit card company, the lender becomes a servant to the credit card company. Two observations on this verse in terms of just the exegetical part, the explanation of what does this mean and what is the writer getting at? First observation, the writer writes in a clever way this pithy statement of wisdom, right? He writes in a way in which he puts in the center of his structure, in the center of his sentence, the key idea. And it's two words, right? And they're rooted together, they're connected together, ruling over and servant. And as he writes his sentence, he connects the first word of the one sentence with the last word of the second sentence, right? And the last word of the first sentence with the first word of the second sentence. He's highlighting something, right? And so the connection, right, is the rich and the lender, they go together, and the poor and the borrower, they go together, and they get ruled over, and they're a servant. So this is an interesting way in which the writer is writing. He writes like this to kind of get our attention and to drive home this point. And the second thing that we need to observe is then these two significant words, the word rule over and servant. So let's do a little word study on the Hebrew words here. So the first one, the rich rule over, is mashal, and that Hebrew word, I write it up here for you, means to rule or to govern or to control or to be in charge of. It's to have a person or an entity exercise authority over a person or government. It is the very same word that the author in Genesis chapter 1 uses to describe what God says when God says that he made man in his image, in his likeness, and he made him to mashal, to rule over the garden. God structured things in our world in such a way that there are those who are over and those that are under. Those that are over have the authority and the responsibility to care for, take care of, provide good things to. It's an important task, an important job. Now, note that there's nothing negative in the word to rule over. The negative part comes in our minds because we've seen lots of bad rule overs, right? We've seen lots of dominating, dictating rulers who rule over people. And therefore, we assign and attribute ruling over to something negative and bad. But again, if you go back to Genesis, in the garden, when everything was perfect and good, God said to Adam and Eve, you are responsible to rule over, have authority over. Right? So that's the first word. Just kind of keep that picture in your mind. It's not necessarily a negative thing. It's not a negative thing. It's not a negative thing to be rich. It's not a negative thing to be poor. It's not a negative thing to have somebody who's more wealthy over somebody who isn't as wealthy. Most of us understand this and live it, and we'll live it tomorrow when we go to work, because we are an employee and we work for a richer, more wealthy company or individual who owns that company, who is willing to take the risk and to invest and to do what was necessary to grow their company, right? And you get hired on as an employee. And as an employee, you work for, and if you work for a great company, you have a great ruler, somebody who rules over you and provides you many good things, and you enjoy and love to work for them because they are a good rule over you. Right? So we understand this idea. It's not negative. It only gets negative when the ruling over becomes done in a negative and in a bad way. So the poor are ruled over by the rich. Now the second phrase is servant, ivad. It means slave, a bond servant, i.e. one who is owned by another for service until they are sold to another or they work their way out of slavery. And again, that one doesn't sound very friendly. It doesn't sound very good. It sounds quite negative, doesn't it? Especially with our country's history in slavery. Let's just go back and talk briefly about ancient practice, in particular, the nation of Israel, who practiced slavery. So, for example, if you were to read Exodus 21, beginning in verse 2 through 7, Moses gives instruction to the nation about how to handle this. 2 Kings 4 talks about slavery. And what we see is that in ancient times, the way that the nation kind of practiced debt and going into debt was a person would say, okay, I will come to work for you, kind of like an employee says, I will come to work for you, but I will work for you for an extended period of time. Right? And if you, at the end of that time, you wanted to continue to work, they would, this is where ear piercing came popular. Take your ear over to the door and they drive an awl through it and put an earring in your ear, and that meant that I wanted to stay as a servant to my master forever and for always. I'm selling myself into this relationship. It's worked out well. Another maybe illustration of this would be Jesus's teaching. So Matthew 18 is a interesting story in which Jesus is talking about the kingdom of heaven. And he says this, the kingdom of heaven, Matthew 18, verse 23, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. And as he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 talents, a lot of money, was brought in. So Jesus is telling the story. This guy is greatly in debt. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. So this was a practice even in Jesus' time. He's using an illustration in which people would understand how this worked out. And again, it can be harsh, and that you could be mistreated. A similar practice, 1600s, as people came to the United States. Maybe they didn't have the money, but they bought a ticket on the Mayflower, wanted to get to the United States, wanted to get to Jamestown Colony. Right? History tells us there's this thing called an indentured servant, right? Where you would sell yourself to a rich businessman for 7 years. You would work for him for 7 years. At the end of the 7 years, you would get your freedom and some land, and you are in the United States. We see this idea, Jacob, right? Who went into debt to his father-in-law. You go back in Genesis, and we see the story of Abraham's son Isaac and Isaac's son Jacob. And Jacob loved Rachel, but his father-in-law gave him Leah. And he said, if you work for me for 7 years, if you go into debt for 7 years, then you can have my daughter. And then another 7 years. He worked for a total of 14 years for his father-in-law Laban as a servant. Okay, this is the picture. The rich rule over the poor. The borrower is a servant to the slave. And so we might simply say this. The verse, I'll read before my notes. So simply stated, the author of the proverb is saying, when you borrow, you get a master. When you borrow, you become a servant. You wind up obligated to work for someone else, giving them your earnings until the debt is paid off. Again, this is just a statement of fact, not a rightness or wrongness, just a statement of fact. And another way to say this might be, for those of us who are pursuing debt, there's a warning, right? And the warning would be, strive to be independent or lose your financial freedom. Strive to be independent or lose your financial freedom. Couple of quick comments now about debt. I think the biggest thing to see from this verse is there's nothing moral, nothing right or wrong said about going in debt. This is very important. Debt is not a morally right or wrong issue. If you choose to go into debt, it's not like you are choosing to sin and go against what God says. Now, that may be surprising because sometimes that's the sense that we get hanging around the church. There's this sense in which all debt is wrong and you should never have debt, and if you go into debt, that's sinful. But that's not what this passage says. Nowhere in Scripture does it say that if you go into debt, you sin. A good summary statement of this comes from an article, What Does the Bible Say About Debt? From Christian Stewardship Network. I'm just going to read an excerpt from this. Debt simply is something, typically money, that is owed or due. That's it. Notice the definition doesn't qualify debt as good or bad. It's simply a condition. Being in debt is owing someone something with the expectation that is to be paid back at some point in the future. To ascribe morality to a debt situation is to form an opinion as to why the debt was created and judge the person accordingly. So this is a warning to us, right? As we may look to our children who may choose debt, or our friend who may choose debt, or somebody who you know who's part of your small group who may choose debt. And you may look at their situation and you may come to certain conclusions about that, and you may judge them for their decision. Caution, warning, right? Debt's not morally right or wrong. Got to be careful about making judgments about other people. But secondly, and this is the kind of the wisdom from the proverb, right? Debt today gets in the way of being able to do something different tomorrow. Right? If I get into debt today, I become a servant to the lender. Right? I have to keep paying back. 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 I become a servant to the lender. I can't get out of it. I'm stuck. A certain portion of my income's got to go to the lender. And so we saw earlier the statistic that says 30% of income is being paid. So whatever 30% of my income is, I'm giving to pay off my debt every single month. And that becomes crushing, and it becomes inhibiting. So I write this in my notes as just some examples, right? I may get trapped in a job. It pays incredibly well, but I don't like the job. I want to get out of the job, but I can't get out of the job because I have too much debt to get out of the job. I may see a ministry that I want to give to. I may be stirred by the work of Selah's Heart and what they're doing to care for moms who lose a newborn child. Or I may be stirred as I hear about what's going on in Ghana and Arm of Hope, and I may want to contribute to that, but I can't because 30% of my income is going to pay off my debt. And on we can go with examples of how debt may get in the way. So just two quick observations on what to do. If you find yourself in debt, do this. Just review the cost of your debt. In other words, what I'm asking you to do is look at it, stare at it, face on, right? Look and see. If you owe, for example, if you owe $7,500 in credit card debt at 18%, and you just pay off the minimum payment of $150 a month because that's what you can afford, it's going to take you 30 years to get rid of the $7,500. And over those 30 years, you will have paid $23,000, more than 3 times the cost of what it was to buy what it was that you bought on credit. So when you look at those numbers and you think about those numbers and you kind of stare at your debt and you realize, oh, wow, look at this, man, I'm paying way more than what I need to pay for this because in the moment I chose to do this, maybe I need to get out of it. I need to run hard at getting out of it. Secondly, do that. Reduce your debt. And how you can do that, I'm going to invite our worship team to come on up. How you can do that, the principle definitely is this: spend less than you make. This is what the federal government has not taught us. This is not what our society teaches us. But spend less than you make. And as quickly as you can, put as much as you can towards that debt and get out of that debt. If you're paying 18%, 21%, maybe even up to 28% on your debt, get rid of it. Discipline yourself to get rid of it. Now, as I close, I just want to talk about us as a church and our debt. So as a church, in the early days, in order to purchase this facility, the church decided to go into debt, to take out a loan, to buy this property. So we had a place to gather and meet regularly. And over time, over the years, we've paid on that debt. Sometime in 2018, there was a conversation in which we were talking about updating the facility, and we asked the stewardship team to kind of look at it. And the stewardship team came back to the elders and said, why are we talking about spending more money when we currently are in debt over $400,000 on this building? And they challenged the elders to kind of think about whether we should do that or not. And as a result, the elders concluded, you know what? The stewardship team's making a wise recommendation to us. And in 2019, we as a church said, let's get out of debt. And in a year and a half, this was, for those of you who were around, this was an amazing time in the life of our church. 2020 to 2021, crazy time in our country. But over $380,000 of debt was paid off. What that enabled us to do as we then rolled into 2022 was to have a budget in which we no longer had a $36,000 a year that we had to pay on debt. And instead we took that $36,000 and we invested it in the ministry of the life of our church. Here's a few of the areas that it went. It went to hire a part-time facility coordinator. It went to hire a part-time director of external focus ministries. And because Dan has come on our team, and he's been a part of our team now for 2 years, the kind of stuff that we've been able to do as a church of being externally focused is just way more than we were ever able to do. Third, we've been able to hire a communication specialist. You know, our short videos are all over the globe, really all over the globe. People in India, people in Pakistan, people in Russia, it's just crazy when you look at how the teaching from the church is getting all over the world. And that was enabled because we now have a communication specialist part-time who does that. We were able to hire more help in the worship ministry, assistant director of worship. And then lastly, we were able to expand the youth position to a full-time position and add to it this young adult ministry, which was so sorely needed in the life of our church. And as a result, we have a group of 10 to 15 young adults who meet every Sunday morning right out here. And that's what getting out of debt has enabled us to do. On top of that, it's enabled us to expand by $20,000 our investment to our external focus ministry partners. When you get out of debt, you have more income that you can then use to do other things. As I turn things over to the worship team, I just want to say our biggest debt as people is our sin. Jesus, when he was asked about how to pray, Jesus said this. He said, pray like this. Ask the Father to take your debt, to forgive your debt as you forgive the debt of those who sin against you. Paul in Romans 6 says the wages of our sin is death, our debt. And Ephesians tells us that we can't work to get out of debt, but God by his grace redeems us and takes us out of that debt. If you've never received God's grace for the debt of your sin, it's available to you. I invite you to receive it right now, even as we sing this closing song. So please stand and sing with us.
All to Jesus I surrender, all to him I freely give. I will ever love and trust him in his presence daily live. I surrender all. I surrender all to thee, my blessed Savior. I surrender all to Jesus. I surrender humbly at his feet I bow. Worldly pleasures all forsaken, take me, Jesus, take me now. I surrender all. I surrender all to thee, my blessed Savior. I surrender all to Jesus I surrender. Make me Savior, will be thine. Fill me with thy love and power. Truly know that thou art mine. I surrender all. I surrender all to thee, my blessed Savior. I surrender all to Jesus I surrender, Lord. I give myself to thee. Fill me with thy love and power. Let thy blessing fall on me. I surrender all. I surrender all to thee, my blessed Savior. I surrender all. Sing, I surrender all. I surrender all. I surrender all to thee, my blessed Savior. I surrender all.
Go Hope Community Church, just grateful for what God has done for us. Live out the wisdom of his word. Have a good week.